Hello, everybody, and welcome to day 17 of The Longing. With me, I have a special guest again. It is not Marcelo, it is a new special guest. It is Mr. Ben. Why don't you introduce yourself, Ben?
Hello, I'm Ben.
Fantastic. So before we get started, I just want to mention to everybody, the way I've been doing this series, I've been making a buffer of videos before I so that I have something to fall back on if I can't make videos for a while. And as you can probably see by the amount of days that have passed, it's been a very long time since I did my last reading of Zarathustra, and I'm completely out of. How do I get out of this screen? I want to be completely out of this screen. I am completely out of my backlog, and so I was already going to talk to Ben today, and now I forced him to be into this interview. Yeah. So, but here we are. Yay!
Woo!
Yay!
He really does walk slow in there.
Yeah, he
Holy
does.
smokes.
Yeah. So, we should we introduce Mr. Ben here. Ben, we've known each other since first grade, I think.
Hmm.
Yes. And we've been friends for that long, and the you're pretty much the only friend of mine that has gone off outside of their house to do things, whereas everybody else just sits around and plays video games or has gotten like a job in a factory where they toil away, or they get some job they don't give a shit about. You've gone a different direction. You have gone into the wilds of nature, and you climb up big rocks and then you fall back down again, and
Yes.
and then you go to the hospital and you get fixed up, and you do it over and over again, and you found meaning in life. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. I like to study plants and all sorts of different fungi, including mushrooms. Um, and I also like to go outside and rock climb. So it's like total blast, to just like go on adventures up like these like super cool rock climbs all over country, and I was lucky enough to go down to Mexico for a month or so and climb there.
I'm gonna set this thing so that it will allow me to walk to a random place again. So I had even less preparation for this than I did for Marcelo, and that was not very much preparation at all. It's probably kind of improbable that that is even
Uh-huh.
possible. However, now we're here. Yeah, I was I was thinking the first time I interviewed you, I'd have like all sorts of interesting questions prepared to ask you about some of the stuff about outdoorsy shit, because
Uh-huh.
you're the only one that I would ask about that kind of thing that I know. So it would be a unique experience, but I don't have any of that prepared. So unless you have some sort of like, oh, I want to tell this story, and then otherwise we're probably just gonna talk about the same shit that I talk about with anyone.
Okay. Um, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. So for the sake of the viewers, we could just go ahead with what you normally talk about, and then if something comes up, I'll mention it.
And when I say what we normally will talk about, I mean like waxing intellectually about different bullshit and all that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh,
Sometimes I have to poop outside. Like I don't know.
yeah. That's yeah. That kind of is the end of that story right there.
I'm gonna stop you right there.
Do you want to go ahead? I'm fine with that. If you got
You don't want the
more to that
details.
story, but
I just leave no trace. That's all I can say.
hmm.
You're hole big enough, and oh,
Yeah, it's always hard to start something like this. I got lucky with Marcelo that we just sort of fell into a conversation, you know.
mhm.
But we could try and get started with talking about what we were talking about the last time we were hanging out. We
Mhm.
talked about, we spent a long time just like we were about to leave and go our separate ways. And then I showed you a Doug Stanhope bit about
Yes.
overpopulation where he complained about his whether or not he really believes it or not. He sort of does. It depends on how you look at things. Of course, he says certain things for the sake of entertainment value, but other things he does truly believe. He was talking about overpopulation and how if overpopulation was solved, then you wouldn't have to deal with any of this shit about like global warming or anything because there wouldn't be enough people to make a difference. And
Yes. He
yeah,
is correct. Just like in a super crude way,
in a
I
super
think.
crude way, yeah. But it got us started talking about that because I could tell it definitely it got you feeling strongly about it. Yeah.
Yes. No, I was definitely yeah, and my initial when we were talking, my initial stance was it's like overpopulation isn't the problem. It's like overconsumption is.
Hmm.
But my I've thought about it a lot since, and I think I've arrived at a new stance is that um both are just part of like it's like duh, but like both are part of the problem. Where it's like overconsumption, especially at our current population, is a humongous problem.
Yes.
I think like, if we had less people on the planet, obviously it would be way better in terms of purely for the environment.
Yes.
Over that's like a slippery slope to like a whole bunch of things like fat like nicks and all that stuff, and that's like something I would personally like to avoid.
A slippery
Like
slope
you're
to what?
saying.
I missed what you said.
Like eugenics or
Sure.
like deciding like like that's like to the logical extreme. So like I'm not saying like oh like if we start thinking about overpopulation like it will lead to that, but that's just like the
That was your
kind of
worry.
yeah.
Yeah. And I
So,
hear
but
you.
I think currently like it's not like we're going to get rid of a or be able to get rid of a whole bunch of people soon
Sure.
by any means.
Yes.
I don't agree with any method that would work to do that.
Yes. And I
No,
would
I
just
think that
say
we
to
need to like drastically reduce our consumption,
sure.
especially like in the Western world where we're like pushing Western values on other places to like follow in that pattern. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
a humongous, multifaceted problem, and there's no easy answer because then we would have just fixed it probably.
Yeah, I think Doug Stanhope would argue the answer would be to have less children. However, he also goes on to say in the same thing that it's unlikely that fucking is going to go out of style anytime soon.
Yeah, that's a really good point because like at the end of the day, like we're a human being with like the little lizard brain part of
Yes.
ourselves. So
Yeah. But what I generally got out of the whole conversation that we had was that there are lots of potential solutions to a lot of potential problems, but
yes,
these potential solutions are all generally very difficult, and you have to get a large amount of people onto that all on the same board, right? And
yeah, I would
so
definitely agree.
the secondary problem is always that like you can't get enough people on board to make the solution happen. And that's where a lot of the problems come in as far as I can tell.
Yeah,
What it seemed to me your original argument was that instead of worrying about the amount of people, we should be worrying about social policies to
mhm,
make the world a better place through a better distribution of resources because I not necessarily in a communist sense or anything, but in the sense of that our current policies enable large power structures like corporations or and sometimes even
yeah,
reward them for doing things that don't make sense
yeah,
with
and
our
like
resources.
yeah, when you take a look at it, like 60, I think it's like I can't remember if it's 50 or 60% of fresh food in the United States ends up in the trash.
Hmm.
without being. If you think about all the resources that it took to like transport all of that food, like we could drastically reduce like a huge amount of carbon that goes in the atmosphere everywhere, but just making sure that the food doesn't go to waste and like goes
Absolutely.
to the right, the right channels and stuff. So that I think that's kind of where what I was trying to articulate.
Hmm. On what you just said, though, about something, for instance, like food waste, I would argue food waste is not so much a something that can be governed as much as that's more of a cultural thing that we need
True.
to figure out because people are using their money to buy what they want, and culturally, especially in America, there's this sense of buy more, eat more, and then finish what's in front of you. But then you get more, and it's. I guess I introduced an extra complication to that, but it's
No, but you're 100% right too,
yeah,
because like, what are you gonna like pass a law that like prohibits people from eating too much? Like,
yeah. So there's
so you're
personal
right. Like the
accountability.
culture really is like the crux of it all, isn't it? Especially like as like talking to someone from the United States, like there's different problems in different areas, but you're right. That's like a big part of our culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would. I'm not sure if I would go so far as to say that is the crux, but I think it is a huge part of it. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
it it seemed to me like when I listened to you before, it sounded like you were uh we were very skeptical about the idea of pushing this idea of stuff like recycle and that'll fix things and cut up your six-pack ring thingy
Yeah.
and we kind of skimmed over that before, and I know I'm talking to the viewer as if they've heard this conversation almost, but fuck them.
Mhm.
uh they're not here anyway. When you said that, we kind of skimmed over that, but could you maybe go into that a bit more?
Yeah.
What? Yeah,
Yeah. So a large, like a large
you're kind of roboting out in the
part
Discord call, so I might have to restart you in
the
just a second.
2000s or whatever, there's been like a lot of campaigning for.
Oop. Yeah, you're really
Oh, nice.
roboting
Sound
out.
good.
Uh,
Oh,
could you
no.
start over? I think you might be okay now.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, in the 2000s and like onward and stuff, there was a big thing where it's like, oh, like make sure to recycle, like cut up your six pack of soda, like clip of soda, sea turtles and choke on and stuff. And there's a basically essentially huge influence or a huge emphasis on individual action as a solver for or as a solution for climate change. While there is like a lot of merit to that type of thinking, which is like it's like, oh, if like each individual person does use a lot of resources, so if you try to limit it, like, there is like going to be like this amount of less soda pop cans like out, and stuff.
Hmm.
And like you're gonna eat less meat, and stuff. So I think having a collective individual action is important, but I also don't think it's the means to the end of like solving this climate crisis too, because there's a
Sure.
lot of nations are the ones that are producing a lot of the carbon, and that's sort of where I think the policy could go in is if you introduce a carbon tax or if you introduce restrictions on how much carbon will be produced. Still, that it's less. It's possible to produce what we are with less carbon, but it's too expensive. If we
Uh,
the production of those technologies through restricting. Oh, am I cutting out?
You were cutting out, but I think probably I understand, and I think everyone else would probably understand that the idea of through either incentivizing the production of more I don't know the word, more,
I guess green technology.
sure, you could use that word, greener technology, stuff that doesn't waste our resources so readily, or
Mm.
like taking away the previous incentives, because it seems like in some areas there may be existing incentives to actually stay with certain things like fossil fuels. I don't know the details, and I
Yes.
might be talking out of
Uh,
my ass. I don't know.
I think you are correct, and I'm not an expert in environmental policy by any means.
Uh,
My
yeah.
audience. But,
So I definitely also thought a lot
I
about
actually do a
that
lot of good.
conversation we had.
Yeah, I've also been thinking a lot about that. I think I was too. A big takeaway for me also was just like I was too camp of thinking. Definitely
Sure.
like shifted and like had a little bit of like cognitive dissonance there, but then like moved past it and started other aspects of it too. I thought it was a really valuable conversation.
Well, I'm really
As
happy
is
to
this
hear
one.
that. I definitely agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed to possible
And
alternative of I thought it was a really annoying conversation that made me lose faith in the human condition because of you. So
I think
fantastic.
there's a lot of work ahead for
I definitely agree.
intelligent, scientifically literate people, and also just like the everyday like citizen scientists to like do some work. But
Yeah,
something's got to be done.
definitely.
We're losing biodiversity at a crazy rate. We're losing our oil reserves. Weather's getting crazier every year. It's here, it's happening. So
When you mentioned the losing biodiversity, it reminded me of the WKUK skit, where I think the skit was entitled Ocean 2.0, and it was, you remember that, where it
I
was
don't offhand.
it was making fun of the BP oil spill, I think, where they were saying this is a new direction for our oceans. Maybe new life will evolve to fill this niche of fish that eats oil or something along those lines. And on one hand, that's really funny, but on the other hand, on like a very small scale, I have heard about the evolution of some microbes that are evolving pathways to digest some forms of plastic, which I thought was very interesting. I don't use that as an argument of this is a good thing, but
Yeah,
it's an interesting little
but
tidbit.
yeah, no, it's a great example of like, especially like microorganisms which have like such a fast reproduction rate. You can like
Yes,
watch elevate like evolution in real time, and
yes,
it's not like we're passively doing this to nature and nature's like no, you know what I mean? It's we're all a part of the system.
yeah,
It's we're as much a part of the system as like like the bacteria that are like able to like survive like crazy temperatures in Yellowstone or a bird in South America. You know what I mean?
I
We're
do.
not a
Yes,
part of it all. We're a get oh, weird wording. We're not a part of it, but we're a part of it.
yes. We are part of the gestalt of the Earth and the universe. Do you know the term gestalt? I really like that term.
Yeah, I recently heard that as a one of my professors would use it when he couldn't really explain why he knew what a mushroom was which. So he would like show like, oh, like this is this mushroom, and like, how do you know? Like, expecting like a technical, like being like, oh, the gills are like this or whatever. He's like, it's just the gestalt of it. Like, I just know it because it is it. You know,
Just like the
so that's where I know the word from. But
just the it is, I know it is because of the way that it is, or whatever that.
that's pretty much what he was saying.
But the way I understand a gestalt, the idea of a gestalt is just it's something where we are able to, through our pattern seeking brains, we are able to take something that is not a not a distinct thing, and our brains turn it into a distinct thing. So an example would be a a big clump of dots in the shape of a square or something, and someone asked, "What do you see?" They'd say like a square, when in reality it's just a bunch of dots in that shape. They're not.
Ah,
So
okay.
it the it's a gestalt is what is the resultant, I guess, of all these indistinct things, or something like, I guess everything is sort of a gestalt because everything is just one part, well, just one universe. Everything is just part. This is stoner talk on some level, but it's also true.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah, everything is just one thing, really, but because it's easier to think of things as distinct objects, we come up with gestalts. That's how I
Yeah,
understand that. As far as yeah, I don't
it's a
know.
super interesting way to think about it. Like, I'm not super up to date on my Greek philosophy, but one of the big three is like talking about how like the idea of something is exactly what it is. Like a donut is only a donut because it adheres to our idea of a donut. But obviously, I didn't use donut as the example. But but,
I know
but
of.
the
I've heard
idea
of
of
Plato's idea of forms.
might be
Um,
what I'm thinking of.
hmm.
It's been a while since I thought about that hard.
I don't know much about it, but I know a little bit about that.
Okay.
But when it comes to Plato's idea of forms, it seemed from the little that I'd heard about it that he was arguing things like there is an absolute version of every idea and there is a
Oh
best
yeah.
version of every idea. But that seems a little bit different from what you're talking about.
No, I might be getting goofed up. I think what I'm thinking of is more contemporary than.
Hmm.
I think you're right where they had an idea. They were thinking one of them. It's hard when there's like three with two very different ideas, but um, yeah, I think you're more correct. There's like something has to be compared to the ideal version of what it is to be it.
Yeah. I don't know where we're going with this conversation, but I need lots of videos, so I'm going to stop this one here so that this can be a full day's episode. And even though this is not a good place to
Okay.
stop it, and then I'm going to say goodbye, and right after this, just introduce a new episode. Goodbye.